Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 135 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. As always, I am one of your hosts, emallson, and joining me, we have my co host, Anomoly.
Hello.
And today, as Shadowlands comes to a close, we are going to be looking back at the 9.0, 9.0.5 kind of patch cycle game and just give it a little bit of hindsight. You know, what can we see now that we couldn't see then?
How
Um,
bad was it really back then?
yeah, yeah. Uh, but before we get into that, we actually have a little bit of news. And before we get to that, Anam, how was your raid this week?
It was so good news, and probably the only good news, we now have another full guild bank of golds from some
Nice.
sales, which is good. The raid itself though, not so good. We one shot one boss. So context, we cleared just a mount run, so it's Sylvanas and Jailer for us. So
Right.
just killing the boss we need for mounts. We one shot two bosses the entire night. One of those was Terragu,
Okay.
and the other
Okay.
one was Vigilant Guardian. So we went on a journey in terms of our raid. Like Anduin had a couple of wipes. Funnily enough, our first wipe of the night was to the fact that we forgot we didn't have one of our typical players in that CC'd one of the mobs. So we found that out as we're getting to that phase, and then realized that the priest that we wanted to shackle didn't tell him to shackle, and then everyone else who could have CC'd didn't have a CC, and so a fear got off,
Yep.
and it went
Yep.
terribly downhill from there.
Yep.
That wasn't too bad, but no, the worst was I think for us was Jailer. I think we spent gosh, probably an hour plus on Jailer, through like probably 12, what did I say, 11 wipes total.
Yeah.
So Jailer was an issue. A lot of like just random P1 wipes to like people not remembering how to do holes or anything like that, or bombs, and a couple P3 and P4 wipes, which are rough because those are like probably 5, 6 minutes into the fight. So,
Yeah.
but no, Jailer was really bad. Sucked. But luckily, and I was nervous because we did Jailer first, then we're going to Sylvanas. So I was like, well, we're doing Sylvanas second, which means we're screwed. Like we're not killing this boss tonight. Like we're already down. We're already having a bad set of wipes, and it's not we're wiping like stupid things. It's not even like
Yeah.
people messing up. It's just like people doing stupid stuff. But yeah, so then we did end up like I think like having 5 wipes of 6 shotting Sylvanas, which wasn't terrible. I finally did, by the way, the other side of Sylvanas. So like when your group splits, like for the we call it skeleton
Ooh.
crew, but it's like the
Yeah.
second split. I finally went to the left and didn't go straight with like the majority of people. And skeleton crew, super easy. Like I don't know what people complain about. Outside the joke. I've never done it before. It's like the easiest part of the fight. But no, it was not a bad raid night other than we didn't get done. It took us the full 4 hours to do all that, so we didn't get done early. And yeah, jailer wipes are just
Yeah.
frustrating, we'll say.
Yeah.
So
Out of curiosity, you mentioned sales. Are you selling the Jailer mount as well, or just the Sylvanas mount?
we sold actually, yeah, we sold one jailer mount this week, and we sold two or two Sylvanas mounts. So yeah. Yeah, I think next week if we can get some more sales, and we'll sell 2 mounts with each boss. So um yeah, I think we finally finished off everybody this week or last week. So yeah.
Cool.
Now it's just we have a couple of mid-tier sanctum bosses to do for some folks as achievements, and then I think we're good.
We need to do Fate Scribe. That is the one boss that we have to do. We have like 8 people that need it. Every other boss, we're good. Just that one.
Nice. Nice, nice, nice,
I mean,
nice.
I technically there's Jailer, but we are going to kill Jailer. So what we did this week is actually we went into Castle Nathria first because we had a bunch of people that still needed Denathria skills. We got them
Yep.
their Denathria skills, full cleared the instance. So all of Castle Nathria is now done. Then we went to go do our Jailer run, and we got through 14 bosses
Oh wow.
on Friday,
You were
which
crushing.
was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And I mean, it turns out that when you do 14 bosses in 4 hours, you kind of run out of time.
Yeah.
So we only had time for a couple of pulls on Jailer. Didn't quite get it. We're going back into Knight for that and for Fate Scribe. And then, I mean, Fate Scribe is a complete wild card, but hopefully it's a short night.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully for you guys, it's not too bad. I think for us, Fate Scribe is always the intermissions.
Yeah.
Or sorry, not the intermissions, but it's always for us, it's always the push into intermission, actually.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
intermissions are typically pretty good, but it's that whole like kill the tank ad, get a little ads down, then push the boss, but do it in a way that doesn't kill the raid. Because like if you get too
Yeah.
many like the whatever the twist of fate stacks or whatever, that
Yeah.
that ability just sucks. So
We did it
um
last time we did it with moats. And we just had 40 stacks of moats every main phase. And we
gotcha.
just pushed. Like, I don't even think we got a tank ad in one of them.
Oh wow, that's
Like, it
awesome.
was ridiculous. But there's no moats this time.
Yeah.
And moats is, of course, the most significant damage buff from the affixes. So losing that is gonna hurt. But
Yeah, yeah.
we
You have to do mechanics now.
might drop a healer. Our healers have
Uh,
been a little bit mad because we keep running too many healers for fights.
gotcha.
And so we've played fewer healers this week overall.
Mhm.
And I think that trend might continue. They're
Nice.
talking about
Nice.
trying to one heal something.
Interesting. Yeah, we funnily enough, we tend to over not over like we tend to probably overheal most things. So we
We do
basically
too.
stick to 4
Yeah,
for
yeah,
most stuff. And to be completely honest with you, I think it's a combination of our healers don't in general swap specs very well. Like I'm a terrible DPS player, so like if
yeah,
you want me to sit, you have to make sure we have an extra DPS. Like we have probably yeah, Graku, one of our other really long standing healers generally is only going to play healing. He'll only play as priest mostly. So yeah, for us to do that, like we can't swap up. Like we need more players basically,
yeah,
versus just like having our healers swap. So generally
yeah,
we stick to 4, 3, 4. Also, to be completely honest with you, I'm super lazy. So like
yeah.
if I'm doing cooldowns, like I don't want to have to figure out like
Our
new
healers,
cooldown rotations.
our healers haven't used CD rotations for all of season 4, basically.
Really?
Yeah,
So I do it light in terms of like I'm like okay for this ability like typically I do like group 1 group 2 so like for example Lords of Dread it's like these two healers use everything on first swarm these two healers use everything on
yeah,
second swarm and like that's the extent of us doing it but
yeah. Like they do some. There's some chatter in the healer channel in game. They've got their own like little community thing.
yeah
Um,
hell yeah
and there's some chatter in there, but like for the most part, I don't know. They just push healing CDs and it just works. Like the only time that we've had it not work is
yeah
we had somebody just like YOLO call, not a healer, so one of the other officers YOLO called for us to do 4 purgings on Guardian last week.
oh nice
Um, and we just lost like half the raid. Because our Holy Paladin had pushed AM earlier, not expecting that we were going to go to 4. So they
yeah
pushed it when it would overlap with second and third.
that's funny
Uh,
that's funny
so yeah, but yeah. I mean, we've had a really killer week. This is good. Um, I kind of want to try and set us up for some last minute mount sales because I feel like that would be a good way to wrap up the expansion, get people some extra gold going into Dragonflight, especially because the cost of the crafted stuff is such a wild card.
yeah yeah
Um, so
I think yeah
we'll
I
see.
think too yeah yeah for
I
us to
might
like oh sorry
catch up with you later on what you're selling each of the mounts for, and
yeah.
that is a
Yeah.
stupid.
Well, I'll let you in. I'll
Yeah,
have to ask, but yeah, I'll ask.
yeah,
I have no idea. I just show up and
yeah. You just show up and collect your
s-
paycheck.
yeah, exactly. I don't know what the going rate is, but I can definitely ask though.
Yeah. Well, cool.
So cool. Yeah. Let's I guess we'll sort of review some of the things that happened this week and then we'll get into like our retrospective. We'll try and speed run these things because there's really not a, well there is a fair amount actually, but I don't think any of it's too important. So
Yeah.
um So first up is it is World of Warcraft anniversary time. So the anniversary event's going on. You can get your fireworks, you get your little bonus XP that actually ends this Tuesday, I think. The bonus XP for the event.
Really?
Maybe? Or I lied. I'm sorry. It ends the 27th of
Yeah, I
November,
was
so
gonna say
right before.
I thought it
My fault.
ended like the right before the expansion release.
No, it's the Winds of Wisdom ends. The 50% XP bonus
Uh,
ends right before Evokers come out.
eh,
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But it's anniversary event. You can go and kill a bunch of world bosses for some like it's like 220, 272, I think, ish loot around there.
yeah.
The Doom Marker's up, Kazak's up, the blue dragons up is Zergos, and then the 4 green dragons, of course, are randomly spawning around the world. Um, go and kill them. It's fun. I green dragons. They need to bring back a world boss that you have to fight other people for. Um,
You could
next
have that
time.
if you went into war mode.
That's true. Well, no, because on my, I guess with cross server stuff now, maybe you see some opposite faction people, but
I definitely on Nine Mage had a great time not being in war mode, being able to actually tag the world boss because every single time it was horrible.
fair enough. Fair enough.
So I mean, there's a solution here. One, play alliance. Two, play in war mode, um, and then you get to fight people for your world boss tag.
That's true. That's true. Maybe I'll try that out. Probably not though. I don't think I so funnily enough, I normally have war mode on when I'm like leveling or doing like the initial stuff just for like the rep and additional or not the rep, but like the XP bonus and then also like there's some sort of bonus for doing world quests as war mode on. I forget what it is.
Yeah,
Um, but not anymore. I think I'm over that.
yeah,
I think I'm done there.
yep.
Um, but cool. So that's 18th anniversary. It's 18 years. It's crazy to
Hmm.
me. How long this game has been out. Literally, God, I shouldn't say it. Anyway, let's move on because it just I'm old and it's gonna make me feel older.
Yeah, yeah.
Next up is they dropped chapter 3 of Legacies, which of course is the Dragonflight pre-cinema or pre-like video things. We've talked about this every week. Just go and watch it. It's really, really good. Episode 3 talks a little bit more about um like the Drakthir and how they came sort of how they came to be, how Natharian sort of interacts with them, why he left them basically to sort
Mm.
of be dormant, and all that fun stuff. So a little bit of like not spoilers, but they've asked some questions like because of course Natharian, which I don't think is a crazy thing, leaves them dormant or leaves them sort of behind as he goes on to start and conquer the world. And it leaves some questions about why he did it. Was he afraid of them? Did he know something in the future where he was going to go crazy and he needed them to stop him or stop something else that's coming? So some interesting lore stuff there. I won't get too much into it. Just watch the cinematic. It's so cool. They need to make these movies.
They better not.
Still,
They better not puppet master Neltharion.
yeah, I hope not. But we'll see what they. I guess that's the other thing is too. We might get another jailer situation where Thorian knew all along he
Yeah,
was the big bad guy behind it all.
yeah.
um, but no, it
Or
seems
worse, that he was like doing the unspeakable to like prevent the greater evil kind of thing.
yeah, which I don't. Yeah,
Yeah,
hopefully it's not that. Hopefully it's not that. Um, so the other thing coming up, next up is if you care, there are Twitch drops coming. So if you guys aren't familiar with what Twitch drops are, this is a great topic. Basically, what it is, you connect your Twitch account to your Blizzard account, and if you watch a specific streamer that has drops enabled for a certain amount of time, you get an item in game, which is really fun. Let's say you watch for 4 hours between November 15th and 18th, so at pre-patch, you get a nice little dragon kite. That's fun. If you watch for 4 hours between the 28th of November and December 1st, you get a mount called the Feldrake, which, if people aren't aware, this was a
this is old news now, but this is a TCG
it's a
mount.
TCG mount, right?
Yeah,
I believe.
yeah.
So people are a little upset that you can get it because it's very rare nowadays.
People have been posting a screenshot of somebody that bought one off eBay a week before the drop announcement for over $2,000.
What an idiot! No offense. Like, okay, so I shouldn't say that. That's actually really rude of me because I would say, okay, so here's my point about something like that. Is like, yes, it's super rare. You probably really want it. It's fine. You would have probably spent the money anyway to get it. So like, it sucks that like 2 weeks later it came out like this, but it's also Blizzard, and you know that they sort of like to bring back things that
Yeah,
previously have been released as like updated thing. Like did it with like the crowns you could get, like the different colored crown, like
Right.
helm transmogs and things like
This is
that. So
this is the first time that they've done a TCG mount. You can
yeah.
just everybody can get this now. This is not like the uh black market auction house,
Hmm.
it's on there, but you have to happen to be there when it's up. You have to be able to bid gold cap probably for it.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a fairly high bar compared to watch 4 hours of Warcraft streams after Dragonflight releases, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit of a different deal. However, I will say, good. Fuck the secondary market. As somebody that played too much Magic the Gathering, fuck the secondary market.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I shouldn't actually say anything about cosmetics or items like that, paying for that in game, since if you looked at the amount of money I spent on Rocket League, you'd be appalled because
Yeah,
that is in the hundreds of dollars on
I
cosmetics
have.
for a car game. So
Yeah, yeah,
I shouldn't talk too much. Cool. But yeah, so Feldrake's come out, a bunch of Twitch drops for launch. Check it out. If you want to get the cool mounts and pets. I think there's like a firework thing too for one of the rewards. So next up is an interesting one, and this one I forgot I put this in here, but I'm actually excited. Is they added a new macro conditional to the game
coming Tuesday. Coming Tuesday.
coming Tuesday. Sorry, it's coming Tuesday, and it's basically called known. And what it lets you do is it lets you essentially put a conditional on if you know the talent. Basically, it's for talents. If you know the talent, then an action will occur. So it's really good for things where, like, if you want one button and you have a choice node and you want to be able to cast one or the other, you can
Right,
use this conditional. Say if you know the one choice, cast it. If you know the other choice, or if you know the other choice, cast that.
right. Or if you
Um,
know that you're never going to be running two talents at the same time, then
exactly.
you can, like, I'm realistically not running right now currently White Tiger statue and Exploding Keg at the same time because it's just like too many on GC cooldowns to push at the start. It's just too
Hmm.
many. So I can make a macro conditional that will cast whichever one of the two I know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and then similarly, you could do it with like restoral and revival for monks, where like you have your same just sort of button, just flips
Yeah,
between the two for Mistweaver. So yeah, really cool addition. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how to do the old. If you know the old talent system had their own sort of conditional too, where the
yeah,
button would swap depending on which talent you took. This
yeah,
is just the updated version of that, which is really cool. So
yeah.
called known, and you can use the spell name or the spell ID to trigger it. So.
Yep.
The other thing coming on Tuesday is phase 2 of the pre-patch, which actually contains the content we care about. So like phase 1 was talents, which I guess maybe the most important. So maybe we cared about that one more. In any event, phase 2 is evokers are here. So you can make your evoker level all 2 levels of your evoker and start grinding covenants or doing whatever you want. I mean, basically it's probably gearing up a little bit.
Yeah. You will
So
have
that is there.
two sets of world bosses to do it with too. Both the anniversary world bosses,
Oh
which
yeah.
dropped the 272 loot, and then the world bosses for the pre-patch event, um, which are not so much world bosses, I guess, but there's the storms, the primal
Hmm.
storms. You go and you do the primal storm. You get the boss at the end. The boss drops loot, and it is a way to help catch up the gear on your evokers. Not going into Dragonflight on your evoker with eye level like 200 gear.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I'm wondering what day we're rating that week. Or I guess this week. I guess we are rating Tuesday this week. Huh. Wonder if anybody who's actually maining Invoker, yeah, guys cross our fingers, is gonna be in our raid that night. God, I hope not. I don't want to carry someone. But yeah, and then
Yeah,
also like you mentioned that I think the pre-patch event will be live, or the event actually will be live, so you get to go kill a bunch of elementals around the world, which is I did it on beta. It's not that it's unfun, it's just another pre-patch event where you
yeah.
farm out some
It's
transmogs and some
formulaic
yeah.
at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. They need to spice they need another like plague event. Like the Wrath one, only
Yeah.
like I think a little bit more hardcore. So and the other thing too is the updated dungeon Uldaman is out too. So there'll be like a quest that sends you into Uldaman. Um it's a couple of new events in there. Again, fairly easy. Like it's not difficult. It's just sort of more story stuff,
Yep.
more like
Yep.
fun content. So,
There's
um,
also an heirloom trinket that you can get if you do all 4 of the primal storms. It's not guaranteed drops. You collect 1 item from each of the 4 primal storms, and
mhm.
then you combine them to make a trinket that's heirloom you can use on all your characters. If you feel like doing them all. I'm probably not getting it.
Yeah,
I'll say that right now.
I'm I might just because I think I'm gonna do a bunch of them on my druid because I'll need like I need to get some gear on my druid anyway, so I'll be sort of doing it that way. So I'm thinking that's gonna be my main alt. If I play an alt this expansion, will probably be the druid to start with. So um, do it that way. So but yeah, second phase of the pre-patch is coming up, which is fun. Um, actually, some things to do in the world. So for a little bit. And then it's just 2 weeks until launch. So we got,
Yeah.
this week, next week is US Thanksgiving, which is fun. And the week after, pre or Dragonflight launch. So 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday,
Yep.
which is going to be, so I still can't get it. Like, I know this is is this the third expansion they did global release or this is the second? Okay.
Shadowlands was the
Yeah. That'll be weird. Um, But cool. All right. So before we get into our retrospective, I do want to give us plenty of time to talk about all that stuff. A couple of tuning things. So we're now in tuning phase of beta. We're not going to go through all of them, but there was a bunch of tuning fixes to a bunch of Dragon or Mythic Plus dungeons.
yeah.
So just read through them. I think they're just getting them right. Things still hit incredibly hard. Some bosses are incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And I think we'll continue to see them dial like turn those dials in the next 2 weeks to get them right. So we're not gonna. I mean,
There,
maybe right at the end we'll talk about relative difficulty, but
yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of like magic damage nerfs across all the dungeons. Some of the stuff that's
mhm,
like stuff you heal through. Some of it is magic damage on tanks that went up by 40%. Uh,
yeah,
so there's a couple of physical ones in there too, but it's mostly magic.
yeah. So there's that, but they did do a ton of. They also are doing a lot of different class changes. And the big one this week, not monk specific, but I want to touch on it. Uh, Guardian Druids got a nice little
Oh
aura buff,
boy.
plus 50% damage modifiers to their aura. So basically, almost all of the damage
Isn't
that
it
they do.
isn't it also a healing buff? Didn't they also get
Yeah,
50? Yeah.
yeah, if any of the if well, it's damage and heal. I don't know if any of the I didn't look at all the affected spells. Most of them
Uh
looked like
yeah.
mostly their damage abilities, but it was damage and healing. So it's just the
Yeah.
flat aura buff, which is I think that's the largest aura buff we've ever seen in WoW dropped in like a single time for a
Right.
class.
Like there's definitely
Uh,
classes that have reached this point over multiple patches, multiple buffs. Like they get, the Windwalker case, 8%, 8%,
yeah.
8%, 8%, just on loop. This is the first time 50% in one go. It's kind of the nuclear option. They were very much underperforming on beta, so they needed some help. 50% aura buff is not exactly something that I had on my bingo card, but uh, for them,
That is absolutely crazy. To be completely honest with you,
like
like
to give some context for people that maybe haven't like paid super close attention to druids, uh, they got a 50% damage buff and are still not the number one damage.
yeah, yeah. No, it's whew, whew. It's yeah. Druids at least guardian druids. And look, I'll speak on behalf of some of my feral brothers. Feral druids probably needs. Uh but nerf resto because resto can't be
Oh
good
yeah,
ever.
resto
Um
meaning resto meaning mobile disc priest.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Oh,
there's also a round of changes to Blood DK. Not as crazy. I'm mentioning it for completeness. They got damage buffs and healing nerfs. Neither of them are particularly large, um, but it is noteworthy that they are buffing their damage because their damage sucked and nerfing their healing. Not because it was necessarily too good, but you know, actually, I'm a little bit surprised that they are. But
yeah. No, yeah, it's definitely it's interesting that they tuned it that way, which I find hilarious. But also, so moving away from druids and more into sort of the monk area. It was, I don't think it was this week, but last week, Windwalker had gone through their tuning pass, which essentially reduced a fair amount of their information. Or sorry, information, a fair amount of their damage. Um, Babs did put out a little bit of a post on Wowhead, just sort of talking about that. And basically, like his point of view is like you were already Windwalker were already one of the number one damage dealers, and this just sort of brings them back in line with the pack. So it's not
Yeah,
sky falling, end of the world. It doesn't make them, unplayable anymore. It's just a sort of a bring them back down into the pack type set of changes. So from Windwalker perspective, the sky is not falling. You still are good. So
yeah.
please stop crying. Um,
They never will.
then then in terms of Mistweaver actually got a ton of changes this week. Many of them looked like nerfs, but there's a little bit behind the scenes. So I'll talk about the good stuff and then we'll talk about some of the changes that were made. So good things are they did revert or add something to our passive that made Teach to the Monastery back to 15% on a reset chance. So they added that to our aura. That was, of course, a change a couple weeks ago. They sort of nerfed the reset chance from teachings, mainly probably because of Windwalker,
Yeah,
or actually only because of Windwalker because Brewmaster doesn't have it. Sorry.
yeah.
So yeah, so added in an aura buff. We're back to 15%. 15%. Each blackout kick has a chance to reset Rising Sun kick. So good change. Blizzard also finally implemented what is it? Save them all, I believe is the name of the
Healing
ability.
spheres? Does that mean like healing spheres? They finally implemented healing
No,
spheres?
no. But Save Them All is now implemented. That's one of our capstone abilities, actually in the class tree. It gives a healing buff if you heal anyone under 35% health. There's no ICD, I believe, and it works off any healing. So even hot ticks will trigger this. So it's a nice buff, you would say, to our healing. However, in tandem with that, we did get a boatload of just healing nerfs across the board. And in net, basically, with Save Them All now implemented and these healing nerfs, our healing essentially stays relatively the same. It's not a
If
large nerf, as you
if you take
say.
save them all.
Exactly, if you take Save Them All, which I think the expectation is you will in any sort of actual progression. It's just a nice boost. Like the raid will generally be dipping low anyway, and since it works off any healing, you have Renewing Mist flying across the raid, so it's
Right,
like it will always be proccing if someone is low, generally speaking.
right.
But yeah, so tons of sort of nerfs there, we'll say, and then also they did nerf Blackout Kick, gave it a minus 20% damage aura. Probably because Blackout Kick on any sort of ad fight, if you it's just absolutely ridiculous, like the cleave from it.
Yeah.
If you take Feline Star, what is it? The Feline Stomp talents, it's a little OP. With that though, they did buff Rising Sun Kick and Tiger Palm from a damage perspective. So
So pushing some of your damage into things that don't cleave.
exactly. So I'm a little bit more. Well, you could say it's more single target damage, but really it's just sort of a balancing out of the fact that we're losing some of that AOE or that cleave. So, all in all, just some tuning. We'll say tuning adjustments to Mistweaver. A lot of people are sort of, I think, a little upset with the nerfs. I'll say, like anybody would be, but I think at the end of the day, it's sort of net, not a large change. I will say
Yeah,
though, the Mythic Plus community, or the folks I talk to that do push Mythic Plus, a little bit upset about the Vivify nerfs, just because our single target healing generally will go through that spell,
right,
and the nerfs themselves seem to be put in place because of the large amount of spread we have now in raids, which isn't as
right.
impactful in five mans. So you could probably say we might need a couple of buffs to maybe just the main target healing of Vivify. I think the problem is the way the spell's coded is the cleaves is based off the main heal. So you would have to adjust all the numbers together, which
Yeah,
gets complicated and a little weird.
yeah.
So, um, but yeah, other than that, Mistweaver, fine, we'll say. They're implementing more talents. I think the only big thing remaining is the avoidance aura is still busted. Unless that's how they
Yeah.
want it to function. And then it's,
That would be really weird. It doesn't say
yeah,
avoidance rating. It
yeah.
is effectively useless if it's for avoidance rating. Because like even if you get to the old avoidance cap of 20% and you take 4% of 20%, it's
Not.
useless. It's less than a
Yeah.
percent.
not worth the points, yeah, at all. So we'll see. I think that's the last major thing remaining, at least for Mistweaver that's been missing in terms of implemented spells. So now it should hopefully just all be tuning from here on out. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't see anything for Brewmaster this week. I didn't.
Oh,
No, quiet week for you guys.
quiet
So
week. Our Charred Passions and related stuff is still broken in rated raids.
nice.
I talked about it last week. Don't run it in Castle Nathria. It does 70% less damage than it should. Same with Bone Dust Brew. Specifically, the talent Bone Dust Brew. I think the Covenant ability is actually fine. So if
Gotcha.
you're going back to Castle Nathria, play something besides those. Other than that, go nuts. Pretty much. Like they do like 40% less than they should in Sanctum, but it's just like not worth trying to play something else because none of the bosses there are particularly nice for invoke Neozao shenanigans.
Yeah.
So you just deal with it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Love broken abilities. Well, cool. I think that's it for the week in review. Unless there's anything else. If not, we are on time in terms of where I wanted to be to talk
Hey.
about retrospectives.
So, like we said last week, we're going through all three kind of raid tiers with in Shadowlands to some perspective now that we're at the end. And that, of course, puts us is talking about patch 9.0.x stuff this week.
The opening.
The opening.
Yeah, so I sort of went back and started collecting some of the notes on this, and I forgot about a lot of stuff from way back when. It's funny. It has only been 2 years, but it feels like it's been a lifetime since then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so I think maybe I'll set the stage on a couple different systems because I think there's a couple things that launched that I think are always fun. So yeah, so we talked. I think when I was putting this together, like the big thing maybe we'll sit on is like covenants to start with. And the idea of like covenants back then, like were very much locked in, right? Like you picked your covenant, you started your renowned grind, you started your or conduit grind, soulbinds, all that fun stuff of getting that all sort of leveled up. Doing like the weekly campaign editions because like the campaign wasn't all available at the start, so each week you had to more of your campaign to do, which I think was cool. Um, I think the problem, and I had 100% forgotten about this. You could change covenants in the opening patches.
Yep.
It just took a week or
So
two
you
in some
could
cases.
you got your first time change to a covenant for free, like air quotes.
Yeah,
That you could just swap, which I did. I started as Night Fae, and then swapped to Kyrian in order to do Windwalker people. Which is another thing that is, I think is actually not on the notes, but we should probably mention. Gearing was busted. I guess we'll talk about
oh yeah,
Valor, but Gearing was
yeah,
busted.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and so I swapped to Kyrian, and I didn't have to do the quests, but it also meant that I was absolutely never going back to Night Fae until they changed it in later patches, because there's no way that I'm doing that again. Doing that
Yeah,
2 weeks, you had to do like you had 2 weeklies to do, and the first one you could do immediately when you tried to swap, and the second
right.
one you had to do the following week. So it took you at least one reset, and then you could swap.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it was terrible. I mean, I think at that point I had chosen on my Mistweaver Kyrian to start with. So that would have been this, like, for me that was the safest play. And yeah, I did not change from Kyrian until the Venthyr patch, until like the Venthyr patch, right? The Fallen Order patch. So
Right.
yeah, no, it was covenants were just, it was, I don't know, it was, you were so locked in. It was so difficult to make a change. And I feel bad for people who like quote unquote picked wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like luckily I think for at least for Mistweaver, and I don't know about for Brews and Windwalkers, but I felt like the initial like recommendations sort of aligned, right, with like what was good. Um
Brewmaster, like I think so. Brewmaster's initial recommendation was basically don't play Venthyr. You can make a
Gotcha.
judgment, like an argument for anything else. Just don't play Venthyr.
Mm,
Um, and Night Fae was behind. Like it was worse in terms of damage. But it has other upsides that it always had. It basically that you get to play Nia because Nia's Soulbind tree is just insane.
yeah.
Uh, and the other covenants hadn't gotten some of their really insane Soulbind powers yet. There was no Kevin's Oozling yet. You
Hmm.
know, none of the MNE like Fleshcraft does damage kind of stuff yet. There
Right.
was not the CDR capstone um, for Weapons of Order on Mechanicos. I don't even know what the Vent lines do, to be totally frank. There was no, like, you didn't get the T from Theotar. Like, all
Theater.
of these,
Yeah.
like, things that are, like, Soulbind defining, Covenant defining things now just didn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
Like, the one Soulbind that was actually, like, stand out really, really good was Nia. So, like,
Hmm.
that was like, half the reason to play Night Fae right there. Also aesthetics.
Yeah.
And like I probably would have stayed Night Fae if I didn't need to like push rating in PvP to a decent point. And like playing Night Fae, like the Night Phalanx Stump is extremely bad in PvP. Extremely bad. You know how hard it is to stay in your Phalanx in PvP?
Oh yeah. Can
Like
imagine.
you can't.
People just walk away.
People just
Yeah.
walk out of it.
Yeah.
Like, and Windwalker's strength is that they can chase people really well. Or one of their strengths is they can chase people really well. You can't really get away from them very easily. But if you're trying to
Right.
sit in your Phalanx, like you're completely undercut that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, like for Mistweaver at least, like our main recommendations were always going to be Windwalker or probably Necrolord. We weren't
You
super high
mean
on.
Kyrian?
Oh yeah, sorry,
You
Kyrian.
said Windwalker.
Yeah, sorry, I was not paying. Yeah, so Kyrian and Necrolord. Um, Bayline Stomp, while nice, like was I think at the time was just too much mana to support like hitting it every 30 seconds along with everything else we did.
Yeah.
And Venthyr was just I think the to be completely if I go back, I wonder if Venthyr would have been okay um at that point in time
You
because
remember
they
how
did
buggy it was?
well, that's the like nobody tested it because it never worked. Like
Yeah.
I
Okay.
specifically leveled on beta to be a Venthyr to test it, like as a part of like the thing. And like I got to max level and it just like
Yeah.
random things would come out, like because I don't think they ever changed the spell power coefficients of that, right? They eventually
They
changed the
did.
spawning.
They
Did
did.
they?
Yeah, because like
They
initially it
buffed.
was like crazy spell. I remember initially it looked like Brewmaster would be Venthyr because the spell power or ability power,
Yeah.
you know, attack power coefficients on the Windwalker and Brewmaster ones were just insane. Um,
Gotcha.
and so it
Gotcha.
was just like by far the highest damage covenant ability, just like hugely ahead of anything else. And then they
Uh-huh.
like nuked it from orbit, you know. And so it has been wrong for the entire expansion to play Venthyr. Later patches, it was less wrong. You know,
Gotcha.
you were at least not hard trolling to play Venthyr after, like they made some changes to give it an absorb shield and later patches that made it actually quite a bit better.
Gotcha. Yeah. I just couldn't remember they if they had if they'd made any sort of late like changes at least to the power because it might have been usable opening patch for Mistweavers if we had done any real testing with it.
Keep in mind, at that point, it was still a 3 minute cooldown, no cooldown reduction.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
even as a 3 minute cooldown
really, okay,
today, like it's not a bad 3 minute cooldown, right?
okay,
Like
all right, fair enough.
it's an overpowered ridiculous at 1 minute, but it's
Okay,
not terrible or unusable at three,
all
right?
right, fair enough,
Um,
fair enough.
so but
I
in any
guess I'm not
event,
super familiar with the numbers on it.
it's just it's like you can ignore everybody for whatever 24 seconds when it's
Yeah,
up or whatever it ends up being. So but in any event, yeah, so I think from a Mistweaver recommendation perspective, we had nailed down Necro and Kyrian. I think that was probably correct
oh,
at the end of the day.
another thing to keep in mind at release, and this actually got changed during this patch cycle, I think, but at release, Fleshcraft was awful.
Yeah, I have that in the notes. So at 9.0.5 they buffed it.
Yeah, they buffed it a
Um
lot. Like the
yeah.
Fleshcraft we have now, that's actually very good, and I like genuinely will not miss having. Like
Hmm.
I've been playing Necrolord for pre-patch, and it's really nice. Like Fleshcraft is really good. Um, but going back to like 9.0, Fleshcraft was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what was it? The healing was lower. There was no damage reduction attached to it. You had to channel for longer.
And to increase the power, you had to be by bodies, like, right? Wasn't that the
Right.
thing?
Oh, right. You had to be next to dead bodies
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get the full power of Fleshcraft,
Of the
which you
yeah.
can obviously do if you're like out in the world, but of course, like good luck doing that in raid.
Yeah, or any sort of, yeah, real content. So, yeah, I mean, covenants were, yeah, it was they were just a very restrictive system. And like you just picked the one you picked basically I think for most people you picked one and you stuck to it cuz swapping was so annoying and like and the other thing too is you ended up being so much further behind your renown gain because like
Yeah.
almost all of your renown came from like either there was no catch up, right? So it was all like dailies or weeklies for the most part.
You had
Plus
your
your gain.
2 weekly quests. You had your renown or your
The animal one.
anima quest to get 1,000 anima. This is of course also pre all of the anima drop rate buffs.
Yeah. Was it
Uh
was tough. You had to be
and
doing some work.
and the one for rescuing souls from the maw, which I understand looking back why it increased the number of souls you had to get every time, but I
Yeah.
still hate it. I don't care about those souls at all.
Yeah, no, I yeah.
Those souls for those that haven't had to care about it in a while, those souls that you brought back were used for your Covenant Sanctum upgrades.
Upgrade.
So, like, by ramping it up over time, it was giving you easier access to the upgrades. The problem being that also meant that the quest took longer because you had to actually rescue more. They didn't just bump the reward. So it went from like the first one is like
5 or 10.
5, and it went
Yeah.
like 5, and then 10, and then 15, and then 20. And so, like, after the first, like, once you hit 20, you're literally spending 4 times as long on this quest. And,
Yeah.
like, sure, I guess you probably have better gear at that point, but 4 times as long on this quest. And at this point, you could not rescue souls from the maw in Torghast, even though
Yeah.
you rescued souls from the maw. That was a uh, very annoying, like, dissonance in
Like
the
overlay, yeah.
design.
Yeah, didn't cover it, yeah. So, no, so yeah, definitely I mean, I guess we can transition a little bit, talk about the mall a little bit. But yeah, no, that was an annoying part of like the whole renown gain is that as you swapped covenants, you just ended up being behind from like a progression point in
Right.
that respect too. Because they hadn't added any of the at this point, renown at the end of dungeons wasn't a thing, renown for boss kills or world boss kills wasn't a thing. So you
Yeah.
basically just got it from those like quests and things like that. So
Yeah.
um so yeah, so um yeah, so that's covenants. I guess the other thing around covenants before we leave them is conduit energy was a thing. And I had for I so this is one of those systems that like personally never interacted with it because like I
Yeah.
set up my character, I didn't change my conduits between Mythic Plus and Raid. So like from a PvE perspective, I never changed. And even
Yeah.
from a PvP perspective, also didn't change my,
Yeah.
the limited PvP I didn't make me change my conduit. So like for me, never interacted with this, but I know this was like a huge issue to some players who like would swap conduits for like different activities and things
Yeah.
like that. So,
Anybody that like had different AoE from single target hits and where they were actually very impactful,
mhm.
you got hit by this. Or if you were swapping specs, that was the other one. And a lot of the times, like 9.0 was the patch where like 90% of DPS were Night Fae,
Mhm.
and there really was not a second Soulbinds. Like you played Nia and you liked it. Um,
Yeah.
Unless you could do something like if you could keep the Karain damage buff up, then you would play Karain. But that was a very niche scenario, right? Like you're not
Mhm.
having that happen on most. Um, so really, you needed to put your Soulbinds back into Nia because it was the or your conduits back into Nia because it was the only. Um, yeah, and this was of course also they nerfed over the course of the expansion before they removed conduit energy. They nerfed the amount of time it takes to get back conduit energy.
Gotcha.
Um, and I don't remember what the cooldown was here, like 6 hours per energy a day per
It was
energy.
long.
It was
I think it was like
long.
day actually. I really want to
Yeah,
say it was like, yeah, it was a ridiculous amount, and you had 10 of them, but like if you swap to do PvP versus PvE stuff,
you were
like you,
swapping 3 out. Yeah,
yeah,
you'd use
it
a third
was,
of your stuff in one go.
yeah. So huge thank you that that's gone. I mean, not that it affected me at all, but I think for players it did affect. It was one of those things where if
Yeah,
you either never interacted with it, you never thought about it, it didn't matter, or it punished you so hard that it like made the game, in your case, like in your specific case, probably slightly unplayable, right?
yeah. Like
Um,
I ran into this because I was doing Windwalker, and
mhm.
that meant that I wanted to put Windwalker conduits in, and so that meant that I did not want to be using. I was spending 3 conduit energy to do Woodwalker PvP and then having to swap back for raid. I hit the cap like once and had to do some raid with Windwalker conduits,
Yeah,
and that just is like
this
Omega
feels
feels bad.
bad.
Yeah, it's so bad.
Yeah, but yeah, conduit energy. Glad that is gone. Um, well, cool. I guess next thing I wanted to sort of just do a bit of a retrospective on was like Torghast or the Mall, or so I don't know which one. Maybe I'll let you pick which direction we head
Let's
because
go
they're kind of
Torghast
similar.
first because Torghast is gonna, I think, set the stage for everything else. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
do you remember the Torghast nerfs?
Uh, the ones that went live right at this point, right? Because did they nerf it in at launch, right?
So like
Or
expansion
am I
goes
misremembering?
live, like end of November, beginning of December timeframe. And then
Mhm.
we have like a week at cap, and they just like
Oh,
rush
yeah.
Torghast. And it goes from
Yeah.
being something that was actually like hard. It wasn't super fun. Like, let's be honest, it was kind of tedious. Um, but it at least could like kill you pretty reliably. Um, there were real gear checks in Torghast. I think that was actually the bigger thing. There were real gear checks, and if you were not a raider, you could not meet checks.
Yep.
Uh, and they just crushed it, just absolutely crushed it. And like I remember very distinctly being very frustrated with Torghast because I had one that I had to wait for a soft reset to get a different boss to spawn in order to do a higher layer because the layer I was doing had an uninterruptible caster boss. And that was actually one of the other changes. They made it so you could interrupt the bosses at the end of the wings. Like
Yeah.
if I remember right, originally you couldn't kick them. And
Yeah,
or am I
maybe.
crazy?
Yeah.
Maybe they just cast faster. I don't know. Anyway, I could not kick it enough, and so like as Windwalker, I would just die to it. But as Brewmaster, I could just like spend 3 minutes dying to it.
Yeah.
It was not pleasant.
Yeah, I will say that. So my Torghast was difficult. I did almost exclusively my Torghast in some sort of group, so some sort of like duo or
Yeah,
trio
yeah,
type group, and and the only saving grace of all this is that if I got corrosive dosage, we won.
right.
like like
Yeah,
that was the way that the runs would go, is like if I was able to pick up corrosive dosage early enough, like
yeah,
we would win win the Torghast run or
right.
whatever. And so it's funny, I'm reading the notes now, and this is to the patch, the 9.0.5 patch, one, but so I don't think it includes these sort of buffs, but there are literally zero changes to monk anima powers in the
Yeah,
patch notes.
yeah,
Monk was like, if you wanted to complete, I feel like the higher key levels, like you wanted a monk and you wanted that monk to get corrosive dosage, and then
yeah.
like it was a
And
you breezed.
this is like, so the other thing about Torghast, like we mentioned that the weekly didn't count. You could rescue all
Yep.
the souls you wanted in Torghast. They did not count for the weekly. Um, but you had to do 2 Torghast runs, one in each wing.
Yep.
And that's actually the one that they ran into issues with was the fire wing. It was like that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the casters. Phew, yeah,
Oh,
and
I have a fire story too. Sorry.
yeah, and the the and you had a limited quantity of soul ash. Like that was the soul ash that you got. Um, So you really needed to actually get both done in order to get your legendary for raid.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I think, like, touching on the legendary system just a little bit, I don't think Blizzard really planned for people to max out legendaries as soon as possible. But then the entire raiding community kind of in unison said, we must max out legendaries as soon as possible. And
Right.
yeah, shenanigans ensued.
Yeah, and I think that was the I think we've talked about Torghast a lot, and that's still my issue with it is that they put a thing that you needed from a progression perspective
Yeah,
behind it.
yeah,
So it could never be difficult. Like it would you always had to make it just difficult enough that you couldn't just walk in. Well, eventually this made it so you can walk in there and do whatever you wanted. But like the idea is like this initial one, it was too hard because of and it was too hard for the requirement that it like sort of gated, right? Like you
right,
needed to do Torghast to get Soul Ash to then get legendaries to get more powerful. And so
right.
like that construct just it they would always have to make Torghast easy enough that
Yeah.
not a casual is such a
And
bad word, but like lower tier players could still complete it and like get what
you
they needed,
it
right?
wasn't like you could do lower difficulties and get more soul ash.
Yeah.
You had to do the highest one in order to get the soul ash for the week. You could
Yeah.
get less for doing the other one, but you couldn't get less for running the other ones multiple times. The
Yeah.
rewards completely dried up after the first run. Um, which of course also like
Yeah. Oh yeah,
the
you couldn't chain
disparity,
run it.
yeah, the disparity in difficulty between different classes, where like monk is actually one of the best. Monk is one
Yeah,
of the
we got
best.
lucky.
Paladin is extremely good if one note, like you pick the Hammer of Wrath powers and you just press Hammer of Wrath over and over again until things die.
Hmm.
You look at something else like Rogue. Here, like another thing about Torghast, all those powers that exist now that like gives you just general self-sustain, like self-healing and things like that, didn't exist.
Not
So
yeah,
you
are
have this
new.
entire game mode where you're not allowed to sneak past the whole thing. You just have to tank it. Where the auto attacks are like very relevant and scary. And Rogue. Like the rogues just can't.
Yeah.
Uh
Yeah.
and coupled with rogues just having very medium powers overall, they actually got some change. Like warriors are in the same boat. Uh like very little self-sustain, very penalizing to just sit and eat all the time. And
Yep.
also no powers to fix the self-sustain.
It just takes forever, right?
Yeah.
They never went live with like the Terra group coming out and killing you, right?
Oh, they did. That was here.
Oh, that was live too. Okay, I forgot about because that's if you
Yeah.
was it if you died too many times or if you took too long, there was like a basically an unkillable boss that would spawn and just chase
Yeah.
you down.
I think it was
Um,
deaths. There's a death limit. It,
yeah, death limit. That's right.
oh, man,
Yeah.
I had forgotten about that.
So yeah, I did a ton of Torghast on beta, but
Oh,
yeah, that was
fun part. If you hit the death limit and got kicked out by the Terragru on the first floor, it would not actually reset and give you a different floor. It would give you the same floor.
oh really?
That's where ended up waiting for that soft reset. Where I was trying to do this was like the third week or so. It was like before we were really geared from raid and well, not keys, but from
That's true.
raid. Uh, and just like trying to do the highest level for Soul Ash, we're like the one before, and it was the fire one. It's always the fire one. Fire one is absolutely the worst.
Yeah.
Uh, just like yeah, that was
Yeah.
just the whole thing is just a big bundle of unpleasantness.
Yeah, no, it was not a fun experience, and yeah, we'll talk about it probably in the next couple weeks if it got any better. But the opening of Torghast, not for me. It just did not hit right.
Spoiler,
Um,
it did get better at least.
yeah, sorry. Um, so next up was the Maw, I guess in tandem with Torghast, and I called this one in the notes Daily Hell, but like the Maw was I to this day, it is the least fun zone I've ever had to interact with at Blizzard. Like within WoW, sorry. Um, it's just if you don't remember the original opening, like you had essentially you had like daily quests you could do in the mall, and then there was like rares and things like that. And
Yeah,
you needed this currency called Stygia. Stygia allowed you to buy things that let you unlock more areas of the mall to get
right.
more dailies and things like that.
And
And
at the end of it, it gave you the ability to randomly roll for conduits
Yeah.
and to get sockets.
Yeah. Just um and so the problem is the longer you stayed in the mall, I mean the more you did, the eye of the jailer would become more and more powerful, and eventually you like would take just unavoidable ticking damage while you were there. Like you'd essentially die if you stayed in the mall any
Right.
longer.
And when you
Um
died, you lost your soul ash.
yeah, or
Or
Stygia.
Stygia, Stygia.
Yeah. And so and you so that's just think about that. Just terrible, just awful. Like you essentially had a limit to what you could do in the zone, like a actual limit that stopped you from staying in there. Anything you did in the zone essentially reduced the amount of time you could spend in the zone, and then you couldn't mount at
Yes.
all. And so
Yes.
you're running around, and the zone isn't
It's
small. Like
big. It's really
it's
big.
it's
For
it's
on foot at
it is
least.
yeah. I mean, I would argue even on a mount, it is a sizable zone.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I absolutely like so I'm the type of player, we've talked about this. I like when bars go up, I will do my dailies all the time. I hated doing them all to the point where like I was just like, do my dailies and get outspent. Don't kill rares. I don't care about rares, I don't care about any of this other stuff.
Yeah.
Like do my dailies and get
There
out.
were
Cause like I
so
can't.
there were so many mistakes with it. Like the whole model of the mob is only going to appeal to a very specific kind of person. Is the kind of
Yeah.
person that is both, like, to borrow a magic term, spiky, kind of person that cares about optimizing the margins,
Hmm.
and that same person has to also like reputation guides,
Yep.
and that person has to be okay with losing their stuff.
Yeah.
I
Which just sucked.
I, I will propose that no such player has ever existed.
No.
Um, because we actually, like, we have a guy in our guild that two of those three things do apply. Like, they care very, like, they will optimize the margins. They will grind anything. Like,
Right.
they were one of the highest Heart of Azeroth levels in the world. Like, they will grind anything. Um, and they had a day where they got stuck in some geometry
Oh
and
no.
died and lost their Stygia that they had been saving up because they were about to hit Exalted.
Uh-huh.
And they emailed support because they literally couldn't, like, mobs just kept spawning on them. They were stuck in combat. They couldn't hearth out, and they just died. There was nothing they could do. Um, and so they contacted support, and support was like, "Yeah, that's how the zone works. Earn some more." Which brings, I think, us to the, like, in my opinion, one of the, like, greatest mistakes they made with the Maw. Stygia drop rates were anemic.
They were so low.
Like, if you
And you
compare,
lost half, right? When you died or
I think it
something?
started as all, and
Oh
then they
yeah,
changed
maybe.
it to half. I don't remember. Maybe I'm just making stuff up. Um,
Yeah.
but it was bad. Like, for comparison, Dark Souls is the, like, main one that people, like, point to, is like when it popularized the pattern of, like, losing everything that you're carrying when you die, or
Yeah.
all the souls that you're carrying when you
Hmm.
um in Dark Souls, like, the you have to get to, like, I don't know, higher than any level I've ever gotten to in order to reach the point that it takes more than, like, 5 or 6 mobs to get you a level.
Yeah.
You would have, like, it was grinding for a week to get a single conduit
So
until you got
ridiculous.
to the end, and then you could do it in, like, a day. At the end, when you had everything unlocked, you could do it in, like, a day. But there's a far cry from spending, like, max amount of time in the maw that you can before it kicks you out versus 5 mobs. I can go back to a bonfire and just level up and not lose anything if I wanted.
Oh yeah.
And I can actually from there just, like, reset and continue grinding those same 5 mobs if I feel like I'm, like, just gonna, take the Pokemon approach and grind my eyeballs out until I overpower everything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, it's not only that too, but like it was so dangerous to be in there that like dying was an eventuality. So it
Yeah.
was like you didn't losing it sucked. And I think the other thing too is like when you died, you didn't ghost back to your body. You just respawned at essentially a graveyard. And
Yeah.
so you had to run back to your body in the real world and then hope you didn't die again. Because if you died a second time, then all the Stygia you would have had been able to re-loot. At
Right.
least we didn't talk about that. If you died,
Yeah.
you could loot your body again and get the Stygia back. But
I'm gonna see if I can figure.
if you
Continue.
died a
Sorry.
second time on the run back to your body, that it was gone. First body
Yeah.
despawns, second body's on the map. Yeah, it's just a. And I did this all. So I'm an idiot, but I also did this all on war mode because I wanted the
Oh
additional rep.
no. Yeah.
Yeah, like I wanted the rep from this thing. So yeah, it was just the dailies were unfun. They were spread out. You had to walk everywhere. Like it just. I was just in general like the mall is probably one of the least fun zones I think we've ever had ever.
Yeah. It it was unpleasant.
Yeah. I
Also,
think there's a different reason I dislike Korthia, which we'll talk about next week, but like this
right.
one was just unfun to be in. Um so
Yeah. So a note for watching the stream, and I guess also probably for people listening, screen
yeah.
just like my computer just froze. Mouse
Okay.
froze and everything. So if there are gaps in my audio and or in the stream, that's probably why.
Yeah. So that's the mall. I never do this again, Blizzard. Never give us a zone that actively tries to kill us as we're trying to grind something and that we can't spend all day in there and that like it's just yeah.
And like
Not be able to
genuinely,
mount. Oh,
like a lot of decisions would have been fine if you could go in and get enough Stygia for a conduit in like 15 minutes.
yeah.
A lot of things become way more like losing your Stygia is fine when you can just go and get more, but when you can't, when
Yeah.
losing your
It's just
Stygia actually means like losing progress, really, like not just losing time, but losing progress. Now you're actually set behind. You can't do anything about it.
yep.
Yeah, that is just I cannot believe that they so thoroughly misunderstood
Yeah.
how that like how the Dark Souls formula first.
Yeah. So I think that's the mall. Yeah, never do this. I just don't. Torghast in the mall, leave him in the dust. Don't bring him back. Um,
Yeah,
I think we'll always have zones like patch zones, but like don't make them like the mall. Like that's just yeah.
yeah,
Zerath Mortis wasn't bad, but yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So the final thing before we start talking maybe a little bit about raids and Mythic Plus is rune carving. So legendary, the legendary system. Um, that I think so here's what I want to say. I think we've talked enough about the actual legendary crafting part of the system that I
Yeah, I
don't
was gonna
think we
say
touch on that here. Like
we have a
let's just
whole
look
episode from back in the day
yeah,
where
like that
me and Peony from Peak
yeah.
just fucking ranted about the leather working material costs, the way that they doubled or more all of the materials costs for the legendaries like a week before the rate like before the expansion release. And so like we legitimately did not have enough materials. I'm going to say this again. I'm going to be saying this again and again for years. We did not have enough materials on our realm to make legendaries. It was not a like
Yeah.
matter of gold. There physically were not enough like items on the realm to
Yeah.
make legendaries. So yeah. Other than that, like there are a bunch of edge cases that are works to the system. Like we talked about the Soul Ash stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously they were super expensive and hard to get. There was
Yep.
also that getting the actual recipes for them was actually causing some degenerate behavior in heroic dungeons in particular, where people, most of them, dropped off of the final boss dungeon, but a few of them dropped off the second or third boss. And so what people
Yep.
would do is they would queue into heroic, they would go, they would kill a couple of bosses, fail to get their recipe, and leave the dungeon. And I think the one that was worse for this was Plaguefall, because that one had people on the second and third bosses that were looking for a legendary recipe.
Right.
And if for those that don't know, if you leave after you kill a boss in a dungeon, there's no leaver penalty. There's no deserter penalty. Um,
Right.
so they would just queue up again. So you would get these people that were just trying to do their like random dungeons, and like 4 people would leave after the second boss.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and then you also had, so you had that, which was definitely some degenerate behavior. And then like for certain classes, some of their best legendaries came from the raid and came from like Sludge Fist or later type
Right.
bosses,
Although
which
those were guaranteed ones, and you could get them on normal.
right, but it still required you to wait and see if you got it. Like, oh, I guess yeah, to make
It was
sure, like to
guaranteed.
basically clear the raid before you did it. So you did
Yeah.
essentially your first handful of raid boss fights without a legendary
Yeah.
while you waited for that to drop.
The worst one actually, Elemental Shaman's legendary dropped from a world boss.
World boss.
And it
We
wasn't
talked about.
any world boss. It was one specific world boss that happened to be the last one in the rotation. So they
Yeah.
could not get their legendary for a month after everybody else could.
Yeah.
A
Which is just
month.
like I get making them drop in the world. I'm fine with that, but I think Blizzard needed to think a little bit about the fact that like not like it's also coupled with the fact that the system like getting like crafting them was difficult enough and then also getting the pattern. So you basically had people to that point like not interacting with the system until they got the perfect legendary, right?
Right.
And the other thing too is like Blizzard was still doing tuning at this point as you think about it. So in
Yeah.
some cases people might have had all the materials ready, had the pattern ready, but wanted to wait until the absolute last moment to craft just in case Blizzard changed something, right?
Yep. And there was
Um
also that the prices were insane on these things. And so you could benefit from maybe not even crafting it until you absolutely needed it, in the hopes that, the influx of new materials would keep the cost down.
yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So I mean, at the end of the day, I think the like legendaries, cool affixes, cool sort of just power increases. I generally don't like legendaries like this. Just because it does a couple things. Number one, the actual system itself was difficult to interact with, gaining the materials, like finding the pattern, things like that. But also it deletes a set of a piece of gear from your list of things you want. So like legendaries now occupy a slot that you'll never replace no matter what, right?
Yeah.
Um
There's
which
a
to me is like it sucks cuz like I never cared about bracers the entire expansion.
yeah.
I never looted leather bracers because leather bracers were a legendary that was never going to unequip. So
Yeah.
like if for me it's like now that I might need leather bracers, or if I change specs, I'm like, shoot, like now I need Windwalker, like
I definitely did
bracers,
that.
right?
I went swapped specs and was like, "Oh, I
Yeah, so
literally don't have another, belt or shoulders or gloves or whatever it was."
it's just I don't know. I find it annoying. It's the same reason I like generally dislike like the Heart of Azeroth and Azerite armor. Like they just locked slots and um
At least like the
even like
Azerite armor, like it dropped from bosses, right? It was
yeah
actually a piece that you had to like acquire and optimize around, versus legendaries being something you just bought on the house, and they were fixed,
yeah
right? You could get your legendary in one of two slots. So
exactly
you weren't like actually trying to optimize um like with a regular piece of crafting gear where you can put it in any slot. There was no real thought about like which slot do I put it. It's like, oh well, this can go on bracers or it can go on chest, and chest gives me more stats and I get to pick stats. So it's always gonna
yeah
have perfect stats. So I'm gonna just put it on the chest.
yeah yeah
Um,
exactly. So but no, it was yeah, legendaries. Ugh, not I mean, they were cool powers. It's just the things around them I think were annoying.
so the thing that
So
I really liked about the legendary system is twofold. One, the thing that I liked about the Legion legendary system is that you had a bunch of different legendaries that you could swap between, and then you had like this, library of different powers you could put on for different situations, and that let you do some fun things. Um,
mhm,
they broke that because you couldn't actually have a bunch of different legendaries for different situations because you couldn't craft them because you couldn't get enough soul ash and probably not enough gold either unless you were doing sales,
right.
which is something we'll get to probably 2 weeks. Um,
Yeah.
and then but then like the thing this had that was better than the Legion one is that it was deterministic. You could always get the one that you did.
Yeah.
But I honestly feel like the thing that I really liked about the legendary system, like having powers you could switch between for different systems, has just been entirely replaced by the new talents. system. Where like before the old talent system, you really didn't have talents that you swapped around very much. You just didn't. There's like a couple that Brewmaster had that you could swap around, but for the most part, you just played your same 6 talents for the entire expansion, for every boss, every dungeon, everything. There's a lot more. Like I'm swapping stuff around fight to fight right now in my talent build, and that scratches that itch from Legendaries. So I am honestly not really disappointed to see them gone. Because I think talents just do it, but with a lot less frustration.
Exactly.
It is interesting to compare legendaries to the crafted gear that we're getting in Dragonflight.
Yeah.
Because they actually have some like proc stuff on the crafted gear. Very good. They're not anywhere near like a good legendary is so much better than what these crafted pieces provide. But there's also some other things like I mentioned that they increase the crafting costs, the materials costs of all these legendaries. They cost just an infinite amount of materials. To reach rank 4, just a huge, ridiculous amount of materials. The crafted gear in Dragonflight is kind of a response to that. It uses more bind on pickup materials instead. So it limits them instead of it being like you have to acquire 100,000 leather. It's more of like you have to get this bind on pickup material from the raid or from people. So it's a little bit more like it's going to be accessible without as much of a gold investment. I hope that's I think the goal. And
let's hope.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah. We haven't even touched on
the raid yet. Raid Mythic Plus
and Mythic Plus.
Well, maybe we talk maybe quickly about Mythic Plus, and then we can go into the raid.
Especially since like season 4, Castle Nathria is fairly fresh.
Yeah. So, the affix in season 1 was Prideful for Mythic Plus, which if you don't remember, it was every 20% of the trash that you killed, a mob would spawn that you would have to kill. It did a handful, like it did the main ability it did was it put a dot on every player. Or was it every player or was it just one? I forget.
There was the ticking damage to the whole group.
It was like every 3 or 4
there
seconds.
was one person every like 5 or 10 seconds or whatever it was that would get the 4 shooty things on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so every 20% this mob would spawn and you'd kill it and then you'd get a damage and healing bonus. And I think you got a mana restore also. Maybe not. It's definitely damage and healing.
Restore. Yeah.
Okay.
And they also nerfed food in dungeons or in general, but they nerfed food at this point.
Yeah, from the drinking piece. So no, you got all of that by killing this. It was a nice routing type. You'd build your route around spawning these pridefuls, typically right before bosses. So you had the damage and healing increase going into the boss. But yeah, it was. I mean, it reminded me a lot of the one affix from BFA that would respawn all the trash every 20%. Except with this one, it gave you Blonde Zombies. Yeah. Except with this one, they gave you a damage bonus with it. So
the thing that I think paradoxically everybody was asking for Kiss Curse affixes, so they gave you the bonus here of a huge damage buff.
Yeah.
And what that meant is you had keys that were not doable unless you had the Prideful affix on a certain boss, or in the case of the other side, multiple bosses. And that just meant that if you wiped on the boss, the key was dead.
Right, exactly.
Whereas, like with the Wansomni one, if you wiped, it's whatever because you didn't get anything from the Wansomni thing. You just had to live it.
Right.
And it was genuinely just fun doing the mass AoE of all the souls coming at you. Like, that was just kind of neat. Like, Prideful actually was good in a lot of ways, but they needed to, like, there's so many things that they could have done. It would have helped. One thing would have just been nerfing the bosses so you didn't need the Prideful to do them.
Yeah.
At least at like a 15 key level, you really, I mean, if you really didn't need it anyway by the time people were, but early in the season, it was extremely helpful. But also, they could have done things like, leaves a body behind that, if you die, you can go and you can click the body to get your buff back.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like, there's a bunch of stuff they could have done that didn't, that would have smoothed out a lot of the rough edges. That
Right.
I think, having done the subsequent seasonal fixes from Shadowlands, I actually think Prideful is not the worst. It is the second worst.
Okay.
That's my
Yeah,
take.
we'll have to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
About where we'd rock the fixes at the end of this. But yeah, that was Prideful. I mean, for me, it was the boss thing was one part of it, but it was also like, do you have enough DPS to kill it before, as a healer, I run out of cooldowns to keep the group alive?
Yeah.
Right.
That was the other thing.
Because
Yeah.
the damage ramp could be
It
uh
it ate up your cooldowns, your single target cooldowns that you were trying to use on a boss.
yeah.
And then, like, yeah.
Yeah, it was an okay affix, I'll say. But yeah, we should rank them at the end here.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I guess for the last probably 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, we'll talk a little bit about the raid. So Nathria was the raid. So we've had Faded, which is interesting. Like this is an interesting sort of way to do this because we have these bosses fresh in our mind.
Right.
And so yeah, so Nathria is a raid. Really, if I remember back then, like the opening part of it, the biggest thing that I remember from the raid is it contained a lot of push timings, right? A lot of
It contains some, but not as bad as Sanctum, which is like
gotcha.
very hindsight is 2020. Like, we didn't know
Yeah,
how good we had it, kind of thing.
that's true. I feel like if I remember at the time, there was like a couple bosses where like you had to push at a specific
Yeah,
point.
there was Council of Blood,
Yeah, Counts was a big
Kalthos,
one.
Zymox, and Stone Legion Generals, which is, almost half of the raid, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
all had that.
yeah, which was just somewhat annoying. I think boss wise, I think the biggest sort of anecdotal thing just from the opening week that I remember is they screwed up scaling in heroic
Yeah,
the opening week.
yeah,
So Houndmaster, which was the second boss that we killed, was
the
doing
bleeds.
mythic levels of bleed damage. We're like actually more than that because people I think at the
Yeah,
time were taking like something like 25 or 30k a tick.
yeah,
And so like we killed it that night, but we wiped to it a while and like
yeah,
we just were I was
yeah,
like, this is way too much damage. Like I think we 6 healed that fight for our first kill.
yeah. That
Which is
I
like,
remember that. I remember
yeah,
like Weekend Gang. We did not have to deal with it because it got hotfixed on like Thursday.
gotcha.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that
Yeah.
was the so. There are two other points. Like, okay, I'm gonna just like real quick. Castle
Yeah.
Nathria was the best raid of the expansion. Sire Denathrius was the best raid boss of the expansion, and Sledgefist is way up there. Like,
I think yeah.
like,
I would say that I agree with all those points.
yeah.
I best raid. I'm trying to think. Like,
It can't be Sepulcher. It's not Sepulcher. There's a
that's
zero
true.
percent chance that it's Sepulcher.
And it can't be Sanctum either, because I don't think Painsmith and Sylvanas save Sanctum from, or sorry, save Sepulcher, or sorry, save Sanctum
Save Sanctum
enough to
from,
make it better than Nathria.
yeah,
Yeah, you're
yeah,
right. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I'm there with you. Nathria, best rate of the expansion for
yeah,
sure. And Denathria, of course, like best, probably top 5 boss fights ever in WoW. Like
yeah.
Sire is hands down one of the
It's
best
still
fights
fun
ever.
to do in Faded too. Like, you get a
Oh
very,
yeah,
it's not, the damage check in phase 3 is not there, so it's not the same, but it's actually a fairly good rendition of what the boss fight was like, and it's still fun to do. So, hey, it's got that going for it. It holds up well. It's not just nostalgia. I had fun doing it on Friday.
yeah, yeah. No, to this, like when we went back and killed Sire for a couple of faded kills that we needed, it holds up as just a fun boss fight. I mean, it ticks the major thing that any great boss fight needs is you fall through a floor,
Yeah.
or change levels, which I still think is like anytime Blizzard puts that in a boss fight, the boss fight's a banger. Like it's top 10 easily and probably top 5. But no, I think Sire, and so the funny thing is Sire overcomes SLG, which I would say SLG is
Yeah. Yeah, SLG's
the
bad.
I don't know if I'd say, I'm trying to think. To me, it's probably the worst fight I've ever progressed on. Like not ever, but it's the worst fight this expansion to progress on, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
it wasn't fun on farm either. It
That's
is
true. Yeah.
actually really it is very acceptable on Fated because you can just kill the boss and not have
Yeah.
to do a bunch of the shitty overlaps. And you don't have to care about push timing. You don't have to stop DPS to push at
Yeah.
specific times. You just like, or at least what we do is we just burn each of the bosses to 50% without doing killing basically anything else. Like we kill the skirmishers just with passive cleave. We
Right.
actually had to drag the Goliath away from the boss to avoid killing it with passive cleave.
Nice.
Because
Nice.
warlocks are, you know, high on soul, whatever it is. And
Yeah.
um, then we kill all three Goliaths in the intermission and just go into the next phase.
Yeah, and I think the problem with the original Sludgefist is you couldn't do that with the Goliath because the healing reduction was 100. Like,
Well, we don't even hit the healing reduction. The issue was just damage. Like you didn't have
yeah,
enough damage to do that in
yeah,
because you would the second leap was like lethal that
yep.
the things would do. So you would have to push before the second one or have the instant bop to save somebody.
That's why I
But
played. I played Paladin on that fight
yeah,
because of that. Actually,
we would
yeah,
you would run out of bops trying to do that because you couldn't push before. Like right now, we push before the first leap.
yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess it's fine now, but Stone Legion Generals at the time is just
Yeah,
I think yeah, to me it's also like like the fight itself, the overlaps were awful. It was long, like, and you hit those bugs that just killed everybody. That just were like
yeah,
the whole Wicked Blade thing is just
yeah.
also
Wicked Blade was buggy the whole time.
unfun and all that type of stuff. So yeah, it's just
Yeah,
a
yeah.
I don't know.
The so there are two quick things that I want to hit. One of them actually is less of a quick thing.
Yeah.
We'll see how much time we have. But I do want to mention, as a brewmaster, Castle Nathria is actually super rough early on because of stagger scaling, and this is I'm concerned about Dragonflight for the same reason. Um, Basically, stagger percent scales off of your agility.
Hmm.
Um, and at a typical raid tier, going from one tier to the next, your item level goes up by around 20. So you get 20% more powerful, you get 20% more effective HP from your stagger percentage. It all kind of works out. And then the K value stuff from the raid, like, you're fine. Um,
Hmm.
but for the launch tier, it's more like 40. And 40 eye levels is a lot. And in fact, because
Yes.
it's exponential, that's really more like 50 to 60% additional power from like gear capping from Mythic. So you're way squishier at
Yeah.
the start of a fresh tier. And that's actually like the reason I'm concerned about Dragonflight is because of the experience with Shadowlands, where like stagger percentage, unless you like you had to grind keys basically to get raid, or actually no, you had to do PvP, which is my other point. Gearing was
Yeah.
broken. Uh,
Yeah.
so this is we have not talked about that. We have not
Yeah.
talked about 9.0.5 at all. We have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to speed run some of this gear stuff. At launch, they had removed, like, they removed Titan Forging, no more corruption, anything. So they dropped less gear on the whole. Dropped less gear just in the whole game. Mythic Plus item level was below Heroic. No Titan Forging meant that you couldn't just spam keys and eventually get stuff that was Mythic level,
Hmm.
or even Heroic level, which meant that keys just weren't very useful. So, in fact, the best way to gear as a raider was to hit 1800 in PvP or 2000 2k if you could do it. Well, no, sorry, 2k if you could do it, 2.2 or 2.4 if you were like really into it.
Yep.
So like that's why I switched to Kyrian. Like I hit like 1750 or something playing Night Fae Windwalker, and then it was like, okay, Night Fae is just not good. Like it's
Yeah.
just not. And so I switched to Kyrian and then got to 2. And
Nice.
then you just had to get like you do your weeklies for for conquests, you would get your val or your honor, and you would buy PvP gear. And you would wear PvP gear. We actually had One of our healers did RBGs. That was the big thing. Was RBG rating was very inflated, so you would do that because it was easier to hit 2K. One of our healers hit like 2400 or whatever the cutoff was to get like end mythic weapons.
Uh-huh.
So they got a weapon off of Sire Denathrius on our first kill and put it up for trade.
Yeah.
Because they didn't need anything. They geared through PvP.
Yeah.
Coupled with
That's
that,
crazy. Yeah. Yeah.
Castle Nathria, and this is actually still true in Faded, Castle Nathria has an insane BoE drop rate compared to other raid tiers this expansion. They never went back and nerfed it because it wasn't relevant at the time, but that also means it's not nerfed in Faded, so you get way more BoEs in Castle
Oh
Nathria than
yeah.
in the other raids. So the whole like combination meant that like you had your legendary that you had to like pay through the nose to buy off the auction house. BoEs were extremely good for gearing. You could fill like 4 slots with BoEs, and they were very well statted. Like Brewmasters had 2 or 3 best in slot items from the BoE pool.
Right.
And then PvP gear was just like the other, like you filled the rest of your slots as much as you could with PvP gear. And if you hit 2K, they were better than heroic high level.
Yeah, yeah. I forgot about that part of the gearing process, and that yeah, gear was just generally so scarce at launch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
which should impact it, yeah, a little bit,
like
yeah.
they added an extra item to mythic drops, right? Like they did it, I guess, also on heroic, right? Like we went from 3 to 4. I
Okay.
think. I think. I could be wrong there.
Okay.
That's just from memory. I didn't look that up. I think that's correct. But I mean, the big thing is in 9.0.5, they introduced Valor again, and Valor, you got it's like 125 or 130 from completing a key. But if somebody gets score from it, which is the other like major thing, is IO score in the game.
Right.
If you got score from it, then you would get an extra like 70 Valor, which
Yeah.
actually had a nice side effect that you would actually have a ton of people just trying to do 2s and 3s and 5s, just like
Yeah.
anything, because they didn't need the gear, they had the pieces they wanted, they just needed the Valor to upgrade them.
To do the upgrades, yeah.
So you would do 2s with new people that would get points for it, and you would collect your 200 Valor and you'd go on your merry way. Kind of like similar vibe to the old Legion carries, but without it being as much of a hard carry, because typically you would have like one person in it, not a whole stack, kind of like or keep carry kind of deal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I forgot about the Valor farming groups, which it's funny, like for me, I think at the time I only needed a handful of pieces on the monk. So
Yeah,
like I got really lucky for most of Nathria in like just in getting the pieces I needed for that
yeah.
opening thing. So yeah,
The
that's oh sorry.
I remember having the trinket from Hekar in the other side
Mhm.
before Valor, which meant that I couldn't upgrade it.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah. I think I had to refarm probably I think it was Changeling at the time
Yeah,
to actually get it like to be upgradable. But yeah, it's yeah, I mean I guess I know we're at time, but I like that part of the gearing stuff did suck. Luckily they changed it with Valor and things like that. But
yeah.
all in all, in terms of Nathria, I mean we didn't talk much about the earlier bosses, but I think the final 3 go from like Sledgefist being, I think, arguably
A
another very
great
good
boss.
boss.
Yeah.
Yeah. SLG to be winning. Eh, I'd say it wasn't a bad fight. It was just a frustrating fight in
Bottom
terms of like progressing.
bottom 3 like late tier boss fights of the I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you had Denathus, which was just an absolute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember telling people like we were progressing SLG and it's like it's okay, it's okay. After this we have Denathrius and Denathrius is good,
Yeah.
right? Like it's we just got to get through this shitter and then when we get to the good boss.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, I think Denathrius, like our first kill on that boss is still something people reference like 2 years later. Because it was just a bunch of necros, like people were
Yeah.
playing Necrolord, proc their Necrolord Soulbind that lets them live for a little bit. We had a shaman who like onked and like
That was
screamed
that
as he
was
was like, yeah,
that was our
yeah,
Denathrius kill. We had a rogue up with cloak up that
Yeah.
so they were immune to the magic damage at the end of Sire Denathrius's final phase, and then
Yeah.
two elemental shaman, just in their like I'm whatever it is, uh, can't
Oh
die
yeah.
forms,
Yeah. Like
and
yeah.
just like they got the kill.
That's
Amazing,
awesome.
amazing.
That's awesome.
Um,
Yeah, but no, opening patch, I guess maybe we'll quickly recap. Opening patch, raids amazing, systems around it not as amazing, we'll say.
after having gone through it, the first patch was kind of awful. Like it
Yeah.
really, at the time, I wasn't as down on it as I am now. I feel like it
Yeah.
really is not surprising at all how poorly Shadowlands went from like
Yeah.
a population standpoint. Um, given how 9.0 was, it was
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah. No, it was definitely one of the, not maybe that's hyperbole, but it was not a good opening set of patches,
Yeah, like
a good launch and things like that around it.
legitimately, I think the BFA launch patch was worse. Uh, but I don't think that this was that much.
Yeah.
So I think the big lesson or the big thing that I'm taking away from I like everything that we've gone through here. Almost none of the criticisms apply to Dragonflight's launch systems, such as they are.
Yeah.
So hopefully, the Dragonflight launch patch will actually be really good,
Yeah.
and we'll see. See. But I think that is going to bring us to the end of our show today. Thank you all
I think
for
so.
watching and or listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to support it and the other work that we do on the Serenity, you can do that over at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, come and join the Discord. They are talking about F1 again in Brew Lounge, but
Bad race.
oh, was it?
For me at least. It was actually
Uh,
drama filled, so it was exciting. So
uh,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
there is, of course, all kinds of info there. If you want to catch up on maybe how the Mistweaver nerfs shake out, or changes, I should say, shake out. Great place to do it. But yeah, that is it for the show today. Thank you all for listening. See you next week.
Bye.